Hello and welcome to the Rewind, where we dive into the making and legacy of various films from cult classics to award-winning masterpieces. Today's film is Final Destination, the teen supernatural horror thriller that was a box office sensation and launched a new franchise and actually celebrates its 25th anniversary as of a few days ago, the 16th of March 2000, when this film came out. Today, talking to me about the first Final Destination, Tyler Nichols, Joe Blow, writer, narrator, video editor, so much more. I'm going to have in the show notes, Tyler, links to all of your stuff and your website so people can check out your things. And I just want to say thank you so very much for your time today. And how are you?
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'm doing wonderful. I'm always glad to come on and talk Final Destination. It's one of my favorite franchises, so pumped for this.
This is a really interesting movie because number one, it comes out 25 years ago. That just makes me feel like even more of an old man than I usually feel when I wake up in the morning. The other one is that I was trying to think back about the first time that I watched this, and I'm pretty sure I did see it in cinemas, but it could be a potential that I saw it either on DVD or VHS. I don't remember whether the DVD kind of generation thing was in full swing by the early 2000s. Maybe it was. But what about
Yeah.
yourself, Tyler? Do you remember the first time you watched this movie?
Yeah, it would have been on DVD and it would have been around the time that Final Destination 2 came out
Right.
because I'm on the younger side and I was only 9 when the first Final Destination came out, so
Mm.
theaters wasn't an option for me, but I was able to see a lot of stuff on DVD. And yeah, I was lucky enough where both of those, I believe Final Destination 2 had just come out on DVD, so then I was able to
Hmm.
see both of them, which I think that was a great way to do it. But honestly, I don't have a distinct memory of watching this film. I think because I've seen it probably 50 times.
Right.
So it's like they all start to blend together. And yeah, I've always loved it, and it has such a 2000s
Mm.
quality. So
Yep.
I think it's you saying like, oh, it's been 25 years. Part of me is shocked, but part of me is like, yeah, I guess when I watch it, it feels 2000, because even the jump to the second film, which is only 3 years later, 2003, like that feels like almost a decade later, just in terms
Mm.
of its like modernity. I guess that's not a word, but that's what I want to say there.
It is now.
Yeah.
So let's just talk about the plot of this film. So pretty much what we're talking about here, you have a class going to a trip to Paris as part of some type of I don't know what it is, kind of like French class kind of thing. I don't know.
Yeah.
Here in Australia, we don't do trips like that because we're like far away from everyone. So, I don't know whether that's a big thing in the States or not. So one of the students, Alex Browning, played by Devon Sawyer, he has a premonition about the plane that he's on crashing, and not only crashing, like a horrific, like full-on horror scene, which is interesting because I think the guys who made this film said they want to do for airplanes what Jaws did for water, and I think for a lot of people, they achieved that. He has a premonition. He freaks out. He gets off the plane. Several other students follow him. An hour later, the plane actually blows up. And then it starts kind of like this bit of a game where these kids are trying to stay one step ahead of death, but they find that death and fate are intertwined. And at the end, the house wins, right? Death is always going to win it. And in a way that he does so, which I think is really the calling card for the whole Final Destination series, is these really kind of elaborate kind of death sequences throughout this film. And I think it's just such an interesting movie. And just reading back about how it all came about, you have this guy named Jeffrey Reddick. He was a writer. He was writing a spec script for the X-Files. And the X-Files was the thing then. Like we were talking about just before how it feels like 2000, like X-Files mid 90s to say mid 2000s. That was like the thing it has. And he reads this article. In the article in it, a woman is about to go on a flight, and a mother told her not to go on a flight, like mother's intuition. And she decides not to, and a plane crashes. It actually happens. And I don't know about you, Tyler, but if someone called me up and said, "Look, I had a bad feeling about you going on a flight," I'm probably going to follow that advice and not go on as well. What about you?
I would say yes, but no, because I've 100% had that happen
Oh,
where I
really?
had a friend say, I have a bad feeling about your flight. And I'm like, don't tell me that. And then I went on it because I'm cheap and I'm not gonna like not go. And I think I just like drank a lot to get through it, but it was fine. There was a little bit of turbulence at one point, but I
Oh
definitely
Lord.
was very upset with her when I landed. I was like, "Hey, I'm gonna blame that turbulence on you, but hey, I landed and I'm safe." So it was a little bit of like a fun moment, but I feel like I'm that element is almost like the skeptic in me.
Hmm.
It's the same thing of like it's like I want to believe that I would follow the smart horror movie character trope, but I don't know. I feel like I would just feel just not even interject, not even get myself involved because just seems like it seems like bad juju all the way. Where I'm like, I'll just go about my business. I'm gonna ignore that you said that this is gonna go poorly.
Hmm.
It's like because if I die, I die. I've always said that if I were to die in a plane crash, it's like, well, at least you know that it's quick.
You enjoyed in the likes of John Denver and Buddy Holly and others. John Denver's an interesting one because he's referenced a few times in the movie. So the
Yes.
script that this guy had, Jeffrey Reddick, the script was called Flight 180. That was the project he what he titled the episode. So in the episode, Scully's younger brother named Charles, who's like a little known character throughout the film, he's the one that survives the plane crash and then the whole kind of stuff happens. And it would have been a really interesting X-Files episodes, I thought, because it does have that kind of Twilight Zone kind of, thing to it. You need to have the really
Yeah.
good premise towards for these things to happen. But then someone says to
Yeah.
him, this will work better as a feature film.
Yeah.
So he retools it, makes it a feature film, and then lo and behold, you have these two guys, James Wong and Glenn Morgan, writers, producers, and directors on X-Files, and also
Yeah.
did that great show, Millennium. Did you ever watch Millennium when that came out
Yes.
with Lance
Yeah.
Henriksen?
Love. Yes. Loved it.
I watched it and I love that thing as well. And so that's a bit of a serendipitous kind of situation here where we've got these X-Files guys. And I don't know about you, X-Files for me, especially here in Australia, we didn't have cable or anything. So anything that came from the US, I was like X-Files or Sopranos or whatever, it was like must watch, sit down TV. What was the X-Files like for you when you were growing up?
I mean, my dad watched it every single Sunday night. It was appointment TV in my house, so I'll always have a like X-Files the movie was one of the first because I don't think it's R-rated, but it's PG-13, but first like
Hmm.
real scary movies I remember seeing in theaters. 'Cause I think I was 6 because I believe that came out in 97. So, yeah.
90, yeah, 97, 98. Yeah, that sounds right. Yeah.
Yeah, so I was very young, so that film in particular and X-Files just always had a big impact on me. I remember my dad had the Entertainment Weekly
Hmm.
cover that had Mulder and Scully on it, and yeah, it's always been a thing in my life. I think if they those bad like MS-DOS style games, my dad had those, so it's like
Hmm.
X-Files were just it was always a thing in my life. And then obviously with me being such a Final Destination guy, James Wong and Glenn Morgan, that it just kind of carried over in with that, and so I always have felt like I've had some kind of connection with that series.
Because it does like it totally fits into like the mold of what supernatural horror thriller stuff was at that time. It all kind of fits. You're saying
Yeah,
before about the feeling of that time, and it's very true. And so New Line, the studio that picks it up, and New Line are infamous because that's the place that built, right? Nightmare on Elm Street and such. And almost immediately, what their note towards this screenplay, which James Wong and Glenn Morgan by then kind of like retooled and such, is that they didn't want the characters to be adults. As young adults are what they were. They say they wanted teens, and you can see why.
yeah,
96, Scream, 98, I Know What You Did Last Summer, the teen. And it's kind of funny to say because a lot of horror movies, all the way back to like Halloween and Friday the 13th, teens are in there, but this is like reinvigorated the whole teen kind of horror um kind of territory. Scream
yeah,
especially, I mean, was just huge then. And so we have to
yeah.
change this to young teens. And I think it was just a masterstroke. I mean, if this movie went ahead and was like adults and wasn't teens, I don't think it would be as popular as it turned out to be. That's my opinion anyway.
Well, and it's funny because you brought up earlier of how like you're like, oh, is this something that they do in the States, go on these kinds of trips?
Mm.
And I would say that's something that happens more in college versus high school.
Hmm.
So that's probably something that was left over from them being young adults in the script. But I would say it's not like unheard of for a high school class to have gone over to a European city specifically because they took whatever language class that is spoken in that city. It's definitely a thing that happened in my school, so it's not too crazy, but it's certainly more common in colleges. So I can definitely see where like that would have been utilized for the young adult aspect, and then it just stayed with the high school because it's fine. Even though I will say that I don't think they look entirely like high schoolers.
Oh
Devon
no.
Sawa, like he's got a lot of like acne, which helps, but he still looks like he's young 20s.
Yeah. Well, that was a thing, right? All the way back to like Rebel Without a Cause or whatever. It's like it's always like these 20 to 20, 22, 25-year-olds playing what they think a teenager is or was in their time. So I
Yeah.
guess by that time we're used to it. And the fact that you had in the movie people like Ellie Larter and Kerr Smith who were already portraying teenagers in like other TV shows or movies, that goes a long
Yeah.
way and kind of like having that kind of thing going. And you're saying before Devon Sawyer, Devon Sawa, I should say, excuse me. He was the last one to be cast in the film. So his character of Alex Browning, it took some time for them to find who was going to play that part because, you know, he was going to be like the head guy and potentially, you know, who knows, sequels and what have you, which, funny enough, he doesn't appear in any sequel since then. Um, but he did a movie called Idle Hands in 1999. And I was trying to remember that film. Is that the one where he loses his hand and the hand goes evil? Is that, am I thinking the right thing? It's kind of like almost like a
Yes.
stoner horror comedy. Is that right?
Yeah, Seth Green and Eldon Henson play his little buddies that he kills, and they're like zombies. And Jessica
Right.
Alba is like the hottest she's ever been in that movie.
So that was
Definitely,
99.
highly recommend.
So that was 1999, 98. They cast Devon Sawyer in the movie. And also, who else is in this film? You got Tony
Sean
Todd.
William Scott.
Sean Wayne Scott playing Billy
Yeah,
Hitchcock, which is funny because he just did again, going back to teen films at that time, American Pie. It's kind of a 180 for him as well because in American Pie, he's kind of like this really kind of arrogant, kind of like horned up kind of guy. In this movie, he's
yeah,
like geek central kind of casting as well. And
yeah,
the one that's really interesting to me though in this movie, which I think is interesting because he's like a through line throughout the film and probably the most memorable person in it. And he's not a teenager; it's Tony Todd, who plays the character of William Bloodworth, the mortician throughout the film. Tony Todd, who just passed away, I think it was late last year, early this year as well. Um,
yes.
Hands down, I mean, Tyler, you have to agree, one of the great voices just in cinema, not even horror cinema, just cinema in general. I mean, that guy's voice is just like velvet. It's just, you can hear it and you know exactly who it is, and his pronunciations of words and everything is just incredible. Whole scenes for sure throughout the film.
I am so glad that he finished his work on Final Destination Bloodlines before he
Hmm.
passed, so that then we get another Bloodworth performance. Because from what I had heard, he's actually more involved in it. Like actually has a scene. It's not like he's a voice or just something minor. So that's good. I feel like that's a good cap off on his legacy. Because obviously he was able to reprise his role in the Candyman reboot. So it's like it's good that it's nice that because he passed away too young at 69. So it's at least there's some kind of bookends to his career, like so it doesn't feel quite as tragic.
And what I like about him being in the film is that, and the really interesting I think about this movie is that when I go back to New Line being the place that Freddy built, so many horror movies, franchise, etc., it's centered around the one monster or creature, your Freddy's, your Jasons, your Michaels, or what have you. But you see them, and you identify them by the visual. Where in this movie, they're dealing with death. Um, and you don't see who it is, like maybe flashes of shadow play here and there. Supposedly, in earlier drafts, Reddick had an actual Angel of Death character in the film, which then Morgan, it's going to be James Wong and Glenn Morgan took out because they like the idea that you can't see this coming. You know, you
Yeah.
don't know when it's going to hit any time, and I think that's kind of this kind of ballsy about it, right? And I've read this article that Reddick did with the Independent only like last week, talking about the 25th anniversary. And he said that it was a great idea because, and I quote, he said, "There's nothing you could see or fight, and the thing was that the studio didn't really understand it at first because they were like, no, we need to have something on the screen that they can, that you can
Yeah.
visualize, that you can, and but the fact that you don't have that not only works so well, but then you have Tony Todd in there as well. That ends up kind of being the guy that's kind of like the one horror figure that's kind of associated throughout the whole franchise, I think anyway, because he's just such a big looming presence that even though you don't see death on its own, you do kind of have someone in there in the form of Tony Todd, one of the great horror actors that kind of does have that kind of visual marker for a lot of people when they watch the
Yeah.
film.
When I think one thing that really helps is that just universal fear of death
Mm,
and especially, and then the Rube Goldberg style of the deaths where it's one thing hitting another, which leads to another. It then just it brings the general audience in a way where they can put themselves in that character's shoes very simply
mhm.
and like imagine, because that's some of the great horror movies are the ones where you're able to essentially use whatever character as a like avatar for yourself in order to say like, oh, what would I do in these situations? I think that's why the Saw franchise was so popular. It's like, oh, what would I do to be able to get out of this trap? And I think that then that universal fear, it's the same thing that most people, if they're driving on a highway and they go by a log truck,
Mm.
they might have that suddenly a whole image, a whole scene plays out from Final Destination 2. And same could be said of the airplane. Same could be said of just the bathroom and taking a shower. Notice how those the shower lines, it's like they aren't really a thing anymore. Like
Right.
they stopped being a thing. It's like, yeah, because stuff like that, like because people like associate those things with something bad because of films like this and because of situations that are like not so pleasant. And yeah, I think they are able to, and especially the first one, it's able to really sink into our primal fear of death.
Well, Reddick in that interview, he said that when they were trying to figure out the ways that they're doing death scenes, he said what they try to do is figure out ways that people could die doing the things that most people have to do at some point in their life. And it's totally true. I mean, I think later on in the series, things get a little more ridiculous, a little more over the top. But in this first
Yeah,
movie in particular, it's like I think my favorite death scene throughout the whole film is when the teacher, what's
Miss
the character's
Luton.
name? Valerie Luton, played by Kristen Cloak. Her death scene is just fantastic because she's just getting the drink, she's
The
there's
John
glass,
Denver
there's
music.
John Denver music. Oh, this is my favorite, my mum's favorite record. She puts it on, and then there's knives, and then there's this, and it's like it's just like you said, it was. And there's also an element of kind of like I find anyway, watching it again, a certain element of slapstick to it all as well. I mean, the whole
Yeah,
point of like slapstick is that you use the environment around you to kind of like create momentum. One thing leads to another to another. And
yeah,
while what Chaplin or Steve Martin or someone like that does leads to like these kind of moments of comedy,
yeah.
it's the opposite here. But at the same time, kind of morbidly fun to watch as well because you don't know what's going to happen and you're trying to, you're just watching this kind of like this plan come into fruition.
Yeah.
And
When
it's just incredible to see it.
a kill is like a joke anyway in terms of like the punchline, the setup, the punchline, where then the kill you have the setup that's going on and then the punchline is the kill itself. So
Yep,
then that satisfaction of like you getting the payoff from all the things that are set up because it's not just one thing that's set up there, it'll be like a minor thing, something that at the very beginning of the scene then comes back, which I think at the very beginning is her setting the tea on the
that's right.
like on the oven. So it's like there's then you get the payoff at the end of the scene with that where it's very smart in how, again, like a good joke, the setup is what, or the payoff is all reliant on the setup in order to get a good punchline, and the punchline is the kill, and the kill is just it's so good because of that setup.
The Matt's Movie Reviews YouTube channel is brought to you by T Public.
TeePublic is the world's largest marketplace for independent creators to sell their work on the highest quality merchandise. With over 1.2 million designs, TeePublic is sure to have something you will love.
That being said, probably the most memorable death from the film is like a punch in the face because of just how random it comes out of nowhere. And to me, I think one of the best jump scares, at least like the last 20, 25 years for sure. And I'm talking about the
Yes.
death of Terry, played by Amanda Detmer. She is telling everyone off. She's on her high horse. She's like, fuck you guys, I'm going home. She hits on the street, and then bang, it just hits. And I remember the first time I watched that, I was like, holy shit. Because not only the timing of it and the randomness of it and how it happened, but also kind of like the blood splatter that happens afterwards, where just kind of like all this
Yes.
crimson just hits all the actors as well, and they just stood there stunned. Do you remember your first reaction when you saw that death scene? Because even though like I've seen so many jump scare movies since then, because jump scares become almost like the universal language for horror film, even when I watched it again, I kind of marvel at like, I remember seeing that for the first time because it was just so out of nowhere. And especially considering what you were saying before about setup, momentum, punchline, there's a certain rhythm that we're kind of used to at that time.
Yes.
So for that one to come, it was all bets off by that point.
Yeah. When you also need, and to further the joke analogy, you also need that breathing room after to in
Mm,
order to like settle down, aka the laughter that comes from the joke. For the kill, it's that shock moment, which they're so smart. It's we get the reactions of all the people, and then it doesn't immediately then go into a like a dialogue scene. It's smart because it knows it's that it wants that theatrical experience where you're like, oh shit, and then you say something to the your whoever's next to you. It's going for that kind of thing, and it pays off so well, and it's such a it's such a big moment. It essentially created a trope.
mm,
You could combine it this with the Sam Jackson Deep Blue Sea death, where it's
yes.
like a character giving an impassioned speech and then boom, out of nowhere, to the point where now anytime since then, because of those two films and two instances, if someone's giving an impassioned speech, you're like, oh shit, is something going to happen to them? I feel like I've been conditioned to think that something is going to happen and very suddenly. So I mean, it created a trope essentially.
The condition, what you just said there, condition, the filmmakers really do condition the audience to be on edge throughout the film. I saw a video that you made on this for Joe Blow, and in the video you talked about how the filmmakers were kind of like what was termed skewing a set, the way that the set was kind of set up, forced perspective shots, certain angles, certain things as well. It kind of keeps things on edge throughout the film and kind of builds up the
Yeah.
dread throughout the movie as well, which I thought was just really fantastic and then really kind of and there's other things as well that happen in the film, and I don't know if you noticed this as well, is that there are moments where, so a big thing about the film is there are things happening in the background. There's certain little hints and tips. There might be, for example, we were just talking about the character of Terry, her death scene. Supposedly earlier in the movie, which is at the airport, there's a poster of a bus behind her in one frame. There's the John Denver song we're talking about, which supposedly in real life, Glenn Morgan was talking about how he was at an airport and John Denver music came on, not that song, but another one, and he kept it in mind for like in use for a movie. But there's other things as well where certain things are set up in a setting for the airport, for example, will change after the incident on the plane. So there's a bar, and a bar is like on a top level and you see the characters walk by the bar as they're heading towards the gate. Afterwards, when the Alex character has his big premonition freak out and they come out, the bar is now on the bottom level and it takes steps to go up and down. And so it's almost like this thing where him cheating death not only kind of changed the fate of these characters, but also changed in subtle ways, or in that case, a kind of big way, the whole environment around them. And you probably don't think about it when you're watching it, but it's kind of like bit of those kind of psychological games that the filmmakers are making that condition you into thinking, look, something is really wrong going on here, and I don't know what it is, but it is in the back of your mind whenever you're watching the film throughout. I thought that was kind of like a bit of artistic genius on their part.
It's like that Stanley Kubrick trick with The Shining of having hallways that don't make sense and not explaining that they don't make sense, not pointing out that they don't make sense, but just logically, it's like, oh, well, you saw the turns don't like based on how they're going, like, no, that you should be then coming out on the room that we just saw. Meanwhile, still a hallway. So it's like that, those I love. It's one of my favorite aspects of filmmaking because one thing that always bugs me is like over exposition. And so
Mm.
I like when things are just subtle and don't have to be over explained. And it's just something like that where it's just, you're essentially rewarded by paying attention to the things around you. Because I think people don't understand that, like, when you're watching a movie that makes you feel uncomfortable, tends to be intentional from the director. They're doing things that are trying to elicit that reaction from you. Yet often it's just dismissed. And I think that those kinds of moments are so special, and I think Final Destination does it so well. And I think one of the reasons it does it so well is the score by Shirley Walker
Mm.
is absolutely phenomenal. It's like a full orchestral score when you wouldn't expect that for this kind of movie. And it's beautiful. I think it's the best score of the entire franchise, and just because again, I'll always take a great orchestra. Like it just works well. What do you think of the music?
I like the music as well, in not only the score and the music choices as well, but
Yeah.
what I really dug about this film is that I think the I think what people expect when they watch a movie like this is just kind of like simple filmmaking because it's just a popcorn flick. And what I dig about what the filmmakers done in this film and so many other horror movies as well is that there are things going on here that you are underestimating. And in some cases, that's an advantage for the filmmakers as well. People are going to go into Final Destination, and I imagine a lot of critics around that time would have as well because they just watched Scream and I Know What You Did Last Summer, etc., expecting,
Yeah.
oh, this is just another throwaway kind of product thing that New Line are putting out there. But there are subtleties to it and there are things to it. And even though this thing had a budget of what, $23 million, you have elements like a full orchestral score throughout the film. It's not some temp track, it's not some ominous whatever, it's not
Yeah.
synth. Or whatever the big soundtrack is at that time, playing,
Yeah.
tunes in the background. You have something there, and I think what that does is brings a certain um, throwback to classic horror filmmaking. And it's interesting they say that because there's a bit of trivia in the film, and I'm pretty sure you noticed as well. A lot of the characters in the film are named on behalf of horror icons. So Alex Browning, named on behalf of Todd Browning, who directed Freaks and Frankenstein. You have who was Agent Shrek, who's one of the FBI agents. He's named after Max Shrek from the Nosferatu, the vampire from Nosferatu. Billy Hitchcock, of course, Alfred Hitchcock. Amanda Detmer's character, Terry Chaney, named after Lon
Yeah.
Chaney. You have a lot of these kind of things there, and to me, it says to me that when it comes to James Wong and Glenn Morgan, and the reason why they are so successful and did great things with X-Files and did really cool stuff with Final Destination is that they know their stuff and they love their stuff and they want to throw in that stuff in there. So when you do watch it, like you said, you've probably seen like a 50 times or such, you pick up on these little things. And
Yeah.
again, it kind of goes against the grain and it goes against any type of misconstrued expectations of what you think this movie is. It isn't throwaway popcorn stuff. Maybe some of the sequels
Mhm.
are, but this movie in particular, there's art, there's and a lot of intelligence behind it, and I think that's really cool for this film.
Yeah, I completely agree. And have you ever listened to the commentary track on this?
I haven't. No, no, no.
It's very fun. I quite enjoy it. I would recommend it. It's informative, but it's also entertaining. And because Glenn Morgan, James Wong, I can't remember who else is on it with them. I might be a producer with them as well. But yeah, I remember listening to it a bunch because I during the 2000s I spent a lot of time just listening to various commentary tracks. It was something that I did a lot. So always stood out to me as a favorite because it was just like I always like commentary tracks where it feels like you're hanging out with people, and
Hmm.
that's one of those that certainly does. But it's also very very informative. So highly recommended.
I think that with the one thing that really bums me out over the last 10 years or so with the advanced popularity of streaming, excuse me, and the decline of DVDs and Blu-rays and such is that there's so many great gems that DVD had, and one of them was the commentary tracks. And I used to love watching, like, one of my favorite commentary tracks of all time wasn't a horror movie. It was actually Gangs of New York, the Martin Scorsese film. And when I listened to the film with the commentary track on it, and Scorsese, just rapid fire, so
Yeah.
much to say, and it's 3 hour film, and it feels so much, talks so much about the history of the time period and everything else that when I watched Gangs of New York afterwards, I had a greater appreciation for the film after listening to his commentary track than I did beforehand. And I think it's something that's severely missing these days. I don't know. I think maybe where they have kind of like audio options in streaming things, if they could have their directors or filmmakers do commentary tracks as part of an audio track on, like, especially like originals, like Netflix originals or Prime originals, whatever. I think that would be a pretty cool thing to pull off, and it adds a little thing extra to the whole
I
thing.
think I think Hulu's been doing that. I think
All
Hulu,
right.
there's options, yeah, to be able to watch with commentary track. Because that's actually one of, because I'm a big film collector. I have a very big DVD, Blu-ray, and 4K collection. And one of my biggest annoyances with 4Ks is just the number of times that they don't have the commentary track on
Mm.
the actual 4K disc. They'll have it on the Blu-ray, but they won't have it on the 4K. Where I'm like, just put this on here. If I want to watch it with commentary, I want to watch it in the highest fidelity possible. It's like there's a reason I bought this 4K. But like, I don't know, there's also a lot less commentary tracks these days. Like
Mm.
the number of releases that have them, it's very few and far between. I think that like Prey, thankfully, had a commentary track, and that was phenomenal. Another one I'd highly recommend. But the ones that we do get, sometimes they're like, I hate it. There's these ones that are stitched together where it's like people that they've recorded at different times, and then they just bring in someone's audio at different points, and then they'll fade out, and it's the worst. I hate those kinds of audio tracks.
It has to be a live, free-flowing conversation. It's definitely what
Yes.
it has to be. Those are
Yeah.
the best ones, I think.
Yeah.
So, like I said, $23 million budget does $110 million box office, like
Huge.
almost 5 times the amount of return there. And when it comes out, look, critics weren't kind with the movie whatsoever. A lot of them were saying it's like, I think the New York Times has said it's a slasher film without the slasher, which is kind of
Yeah.
like the point, right? And a lot
Yeah.
of people kind of like put it down, which I think, look, maybe I think I mentioned before, I think maybe there's a little bit of worn out, like critics probably worn out from at that time, maybe certain with the horror movie, kind of like mainstream horror movie, kind of like environment at the time is kind of like a lot of that teen movie stuff. Maybe didn't give the movie the proper due that I think it deserved. But I think something that really interesting that happened here is that at that time, and I'm trying to think, you had Scream, and that kind of became a franchise. But Final Destination as a franchise is really interesting to me because you need to have all these great kills throughout the movie. And I think what makes it, you're saying the second film, the one with the log truck. Yeah, I think the fourth one had the roller coaster.
As a
It's the
third
what
one. The
there's
fourth
a third
one's
one.
the fourth one's the NASCAR accident.
Oh, right, okay. And
Yeah, that's the bad
and
one.
and things do get really ludicrous as they go on. But
Yeah.
now they're making a new film, and it's going to be called Bloodlines, which is funny because I'm pretty sure there was a Hellraiser movie that was called Bloodlines as well. So I don't know if it was the best kind of tag along there. But if the premise of doing these kill scenes is that you want to figure out ways of doing things where people do something at most point in their life. How many kills do you think they're going to be in this new one where people are just looking at their phone, walking down the street and doing something really stupid, and that's how it kind of comes across? Because I have a feeling that in a pre-phone social media world, you could be more creative with things, but I think post a lot I'd imagine that a lot of accidents that come about these days have to do with people being preoccupied with either looking
Yeah.
at their phone or doing something else. And I don't know how you can get away from doing a movie where the teens in the film aren't doing anything but looking at their devices. I think it's a little sketchy there.
Yeah, I'm curious how they go about it. I think it's going to be the most kills in the franchise because of just the premise itself. It seems to be taking place in different decades, which I think will then allow them to just show like, oh, this is how this person died. This is how my grandpa died. This is how, and then we'll get like some kind of flashback. Wouldn't shock me if we get a lot of deaths that way, but I'm I'm really not looking forward to this new Final Destination. I don't know. I don't think that I just everything I've seen for it, I'm very scared about it. I'm getting the Final Destination vibes, which is the
Mm.
fourth film, where it just doesn't seem like they understand what makes a fun Final Destination and a good or a good just a good Final Destination. It doesn't have to be. I wouldn't say this one is super fun. It's a good dark movie. But like the second one, super fun. Third one, super fun. They can get schlocky at times, but they have a certain there's an entertainment value in seeing these Rube Goldberg style deaths. That then I don't know. I think that it's just the legacy sequel. Maybe it's the
Mm.
pessimist in me, but it just doesn't seem to carry over with this Final Destination series. I don't. We already kind of got our legacy sequel, the Destination 5. So
Right.
then it's like we're doing it again, and I don't know. I already got I got the monkey. The monkey was practically Final Destination, so it's like I don't know. I hope it's good. That's all that's all I can hope for. But the deaths themselves, I try not to overthink it because and just kind of take what they give me because I've already heard like there's a tattoo gun death. And so
Mm.
then it's like, fuck, I don't want to then have expectations because I'm also a writer. So then I don't want to like I don't want to think of something that's more creative when what they come up with and then unfairly judge them where it's like, no, what, you know what I mean? Like, so I try not to think too much about bloodlines, but I'm very worried about it, needless to say.
I'm
What
very
about you?
skeptical. I'm skeptical as well because I watched one, two, and I'm pretty sure I watched three, but then after that, I think I'm cool. I'm good. I've watched enough of this stuff. I try not to go too far into horror sequels. I think I learned my lesson from being a kid going to VH, getting VHS copies of back in the day when you could go to video stores and watching, Jason Goes to Hell and such. I think I've learned my lesson after that, not to go too far into the sequel weeds with that. So when it comes to this film, it feels like taking kind of exploiting the 25th anniversary of the first film, and I think it's just another kind of legacy sequel kind of thing. I wouldn't be surprised if Sawa pops up in the movie. I'm not sure. Was he in the fifth one, the legacy sequel, or was he not in? He might pop up in
Um,
this one. So.
so I'm not gonna, I don't, you, I, so I'm just gonna say right now, Final Destination 5 is my favorite in the franchise. I
Mhm.
fucking love the fifth one, and it has a very fun twist at the end, so I don't want to tell you if he's in it or not.
Okay, all right. Very good,
There
very
might be
good.
archive footage, might not be new footage, might be some archive footage, but yeah, I wouldn't be shocked if he were to show up in Bloodlines because there is like a legacy element to it, but and they've
Yeah.
already killed off everyone else, so he's really
Um,
the only person they can go to outside of Bloodworth.
did you hear about how the Bloodlines directors Zach Lipovsky and Adam Stein, did you hear how they scored the gig for this movie?
Didn't they just pitch to didn't they pitch to Chris Morgan?
Did you know what the pitch was?
I I may have read it, but I don't remember at this point.
So it was a Zoom video call. So they're in their office, they're talking to, the New Line guys or whoever it be. All of a sudden, their ceiling goes up in flames. The fan comes crashing down and decapitates both of them. And then afterwards, they're like, haha, tricked you. It's all SFX. And it was such a great kind of like that Final Destination style kill that it pretty much got them the gig like right there straight away. And I think that when it comes to kind of like, putting together a pitch, it's a really kind of creative way to go about it. If you're going to do a Final
Yeah,
Destination film, I think it's a great way to go about doing so. And
yeah.
kind of makes me try to think how can I up my game when trying to do some writing pitches in the future. But I don't know if I can go that far though.
I mean, the art of the pitch is it's something. I mean, Max Landis, he's can't. I mean, I wouldn't say he has great scripts, but he can pitch a movie like crazy. So
Hmm.
sometimes it's like the art, like there's definitely an art form to pitching. But
Oh,
then I
nice.
would also say it doesn't entirely transfer over to the actual completion of the film. But like I think pitching is something that's very there's a reason that like there's some directors or even producers or actors where it's like you see them and you're like, how do they keep getting work? And it's like,
Mm,
oh, because they're good in the back room. They're good in meetings. They're good when
mm.
pitching themselves or when like making it seem like a good idea to cast them or to have them have a project. So some people are really good at that. And then the opposite side of the coin, there's some auteurs who are such brilliant filmmakers that never get to make shit because they're just not good at that side of the business. So yeah,
The Matt's Movie Reviews podcast is brought to you by Amazon Prime Video. One of the best on-demand streaming services available, Amazon Prime Video features exclusive Amazon originals as well as popular movies and TV shows. Watch Amazon Prime Video anytime, anywhere.
You and I were talking about wrestling off air. Kind of sounds like kind of like the Hulk Hogan kind of like versus Hulk Hogan versus someone like I don't know Ricky the Dragon or Jake the Snake or stuff. Is like Hulk Hogan's the guy who's like really good at kind of pitching himself over to anything to the point where he can just get total control. And I think that's a really yeah, it's a really interesting point you brought up. I just want to talk about to finish this off like the theme in the film is death and death tied with fate and such. And it's a really interesting where this film comes out. So it's 2000 and it's stuck in the middle between two really kind of pivotal moments that center around death in two different ways. On one end, a few years beforehand, you had the death of Princess Diana, which is actually photos of that is featured in the film when the
yeah,
character of Alex is going through different kind of like things and such. Post that, a couple of years after, or a year after, you have 9/11, and it's kind of right in the middle between both of those things. To me, it's just like a really kind of interesting how this movie about death and fate and how when your time is up, your time is up. It's kind of centered in between these two things. And looking back on it, it's kind of like an eerie kind of thing to see. I don't know if that's something that ever came across like your mind as well, like when looking back in this, like how the 2000 itself, which was the time of you know, move it on to this new century and we're gonna, it's gonna be moving forward and the future is here and everything else. Then these two kind of things happen and all of a sudden it's just like everything is just starts getting really swamped down and then wars follow and everything else. It's such an interesting kind of moment in time when this film comes out, I think.
yeah. I think those are two moments that really affected the like society's perception of death. And so then I think that then having Final Destination sandwich in between there, it's which then it's speaking on death. And then obviously with 9/11, there's the plane element where it feels it's something that's like we were talking about with earlier with death just being a universal fear. That that fear was then brought up by Diana's death or any of the terrorist events from 9/11. It's that is then in the public consciousness. So then with that being in the public consciousness, then there's a stuff like this hits more. There's you are more contemplating your own life and your own and your own death. And so things like this just feel more poignant, feel more because it always brings up the question too of are you really living a life if this is the life that you're living? Because like I know that if I were given the choice of being on that plane that goes to France and crashes or living out the terrible month that these kids do, I'm
Mm,
picking the plane every time.
mm.
Every time. I have I've watched enough horror films and lived enough life to know that I'm not the main character. I'm not getting out of this.
And I think what's really interesting about a film like this, where you have teenagers being the main kind of like protagonists in the film, and it's something that it follows the David Robert Mitchell film, which came out like 10 years ago as well. Around as funny enough, around the same time that this movie came out as well, 10 years between each other,
Yeah.
where these films deal with the when you adolescents are moving into adulthood, all of a sudden mortality becomes a big question, and that ticking clock of time really does begin, and that's when you start to really you realize, I'm getting older and death is going to be inevitable at some stage. I think it's a really kind of interesting kind of phase of life to kind of look at,
Yeah.
especially to put in a horror movie like this.
Yeah. Yeah, the reality of death feels so distant when you're a teenager. So having teens actually have to confront death and confront it very quickly and very like not it's like, oh, it's not just, oh, you're gonna die 60 years down the road. It's like, hey,
Mm.
death is hunting you now.
Yeah, and for no
Even
rhyme and reason. It's not like usually the slasher thing is because you've had sex or you did
yeah.
this or you did that. There's certain rules to it, and there are rules to this as well. Like the character Bloodworth, which makes him very interesting, is that his rules, but the rules that he plays out is, look, that was your time. Somehow, some way, you managed to not go at your time. But that doesn't mean that, like, you've got a second chance here. All it means is that you're just drawn out the inevitable. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
going back to your point of like having that month, again, if you know that that was supposed to be your time and that was your time to go, that month afterwards, yeah, what would be your interpretation? Would it be a sigh of relief in saying, geez, I'm so happy that I survived that? Or would it be a thing of, if I know this thing is coming after me, is the life worth living right now if I just know that at any moment I'm going to trip over and go into that shower curtain and that shower curtain over to this thing and then that thing, and it just leads to something even more gruesome and terrifying, for not only for yourself but the people around you as well. I think it's a horrifying thing to think about, and a reason why this
Yeah.
movie works so well.
Yeah, I'm a ball of nerves and anxiety, so my what little life I would have to live would be instantly ruined if I have that like hanging over me. I think the scene where Devon Sawa is in the cabin and
Mm,
like has he's taped down all the doors and all this stuff. That is one of the most relatable scenes in the movie because I'm like, yep, that's 100% what I would do. I would be paranoid of every little creak and every wind blow and he's clearly correct in that paranoia too. So it's like I don't know. If anything, it just kind of probably incorrectly validates my paranoia regarding things. From like, see, he's being paranoid and it got him almost got him out of the situation. That's why I need to be paranoid too.
well, I'll tell you what, if and like I'm fully saying, like, I'm ignorant whether he has beforehand or not. If Devon Sawa does appear in Bloodlines and he's not a hermit living in the mountains wearing a potato sack, I'm going to be very disappointed because there's no way that guy's living life except for that way. In fact, I want him in one of those huge kind of sumo kind of like plastic kind of bubble things where he's just running, walking around with that thing on.
Yeah.
Because yeah, there's no way he'll be living his life in any other way
Yeah.
except for
And
that.
just and you can have a little line about how he put out an article about how a brick hit him in the head because that's how they explain it away in the second movie because
Is that
he can
right?
just say I didn't want he's like he can just be like I didn't want to just keep being contacted by new victims because
Mm,
that's what happens is these people then like they have a premonition and then they look up online, they're like, oh, this person this happened to these people, so he's
right.
essentially like getting ahead of that. So I've always had the theory that he's still alive somewhere, so I'm hoping, but I was also the dummy that thought Devon Sawa was going to be the killer in Hard Eyes, so
Oh, all
not
right, fair
not
enough.
not always right.
Though Ali Larter was in the second one, right? She's kind of like the link between. Is she in the third one as well,
Yep.
or does she beat her demise in the
she,
second?
she gets killed at the end of the second one. Oxygen tank blows her up.
Wow. I'll tell
Yeah.
you what. Oh, there we go. It's really fantastic to think of as well. They got all these actors that are still working. Like Ali Larter is still huge with Landman, and Devon Sawa. Even though he didn't quite reach the heights I think people projected him to reach, he's still working, and he's in some great like Hunter that came out like 4 or 5 years ago. He was great in that, and some other
Yeah.
films too. And of
Yeah.
course the great
Rocking it
late
on
great.
Chucky. Mhm.
Yeah, absolutely. Late great Tony
Yeah.
Todd as well. His presence is
Yeah.
always felt wherever he is. And yeah,
Yep.
Final Destination, 25 years. Like I said, feel incredibly old when some of these, because like you were nine at 25 years, like that went into year 2000, I was like 19. So there's like that's something for you
Prime
right there.
time.
Big
That's that
time.
prime time for like, oh, that's when you're like, and it's like when you're in the prime of your movie watching experience when it's
Yeah.
when you're essentially building everything that you're going to then love later in life.
absolutely. I think from 19 to like 25 was like the years of just finding all these great films and such and being there. And then which led to this was like in a year after, like in 2006 when I started doing what I'm doing now. So it'll be it should be 19 years this year that I started doing all this stuff with Matt's movie reviews. So yeah, it's been awesome. And it's been great to talk to you today, Tyler, and for everyone out there. Tyler Nichols, I want you all to check out his stuff. I'm going to have in the show notes below, website, where you can find all the WTF stuff. He's film critic stuff with Joe Blow as well. And do check out his work, because he's like one of the main guys that really drives that kind of the creative kind of the force, almost kind of like the voice of Joe Blow in a lot of ways. And I'm a big fan of Joe Blow. I love you guys and what you do over there. And Tyler's a big reason why I do is because of the work you put over there too. So it's been a pleasure to talk to you today, and hopefully we can talk again in the future.
Well, thank you so much for having me, and that was all very, very sweet. I really, really appreciate it. And yeah, I would love to come on again. This was an absolute blast, and yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for watching the Matt's Movie Reviews channel. Please subscribe for more reviews, podcast interviews, and exclusive content.